All right, class. So this week we are going to talk about dissociative disorders. And under this class of disorders are dissociative identity disorder, otherwise known as DID, previously known as multiple personality disorder, dissociative amnesia, and depersonalization and derealization disorder. So the characterization of dissociative disorders is essentially a disruption or like a blacking out, a forgetting, a discontinuity in consciousness, memory, identity, emotion, perception, body representation, motor control, and behavior. So this can be observed by others in terms of maybe like personality differences, different reactions to maybe something that they are accustomed to. And remember this, to have a diagnosis, it causes clinically significant distress. So forgetting for, kind of differing amounts of time where you've been, what you did. So dissociative disorders are experienced as intrusions into awareness and behavior with accompanying losses of continuity in subjective experience. So these can be positive dissociative symptoms like fragmentation of identity, personalization, or derealization. So these are existing symptoms, right? So it's not a lack of symptoms, it's a existence of a dissociative symptom. And then the second is the inability to access information or to control mental functions that normally are readily amenable to access or control. So these are negative. So, a lack of something, dissociative symptoms like amnesia. So dissociative symptoms are not always, I don't think we can ever say always in terms of mental health because everybody's experience is so different. But they are frequently found in the aftermath of trauma. So I don't know if y'all have taken your trauma and crisis intervention course yet, but this can be acute or chronic trauma. Chronic trauma can be something like living in a household where there is domestic violence. It can be captivity, prolonged periods of torture, isolation. Trauma can also be acute in term, kind of like a shorter period of trauma, like a sexual assault, like a single incident of intimate partner violence, a single incident of a natural disaster. So many of the symptoms, like embarrassment and confusion about the symptoms or a desire to hide them, are influenced by the proximity to trauma. So whether that is, being geographically close to where the trauma occurred, time since the trauma, being around people who experience the trauma with you, being around a perpetrator, things like that's proximity means, like physical, time, emotional proximity, things like that. So talking about depersonalization and derealization, this is characterized by a clinically significant, persistent, or recurrent depersonalization. So depersonalization is experiences of unreality, detachment, or being an outside observer with respect to your own thoughts, feelings, sensations, bodies, and actions. So it's like an out-of-body experience. And then derealization is experiences of unreality or detachment with respect to your surroundings. So things that are around you. So these are seeing individuals or objects as not real, dreamlike, foggy, lifeless, visually distorted. So if you are screening for depersonalization, you might ask a question like, do you ever get the weird detached feeling that you're watching yourself go through the motions of life? So again, kind of like an out-of-body experience, a detachment from your like, I guess kind of what we take for granted in terms of, recognizing that a thought is your own, that I am experiencing myself speaking right now. And then derealization, a screening question for that could be, do things ever seem unreal? Like you are living in a dream world or in a movie, even when you are awake. So it's a general disconnection from the things around you and having a sense that these are real. So this is different than something like schizophrenia, for example, or having psychotic features within a diagnosis. So for this diagnosis of depersonalization, derealization disorder, the person still has to be in touch with reality. So they have to really be able to like decipher when they are feeling disconnected. So otherwise, as I said, a diagnosis might be something like schizophrenia, other psychotic disorders, or possibly bipolar or depressive disorder with psychotic symptoms. Cognitive disconnection schemata reflect defectiveness and emotional inhibition and subsume themes of abuse, neglect, and deprivation. So cognitive disconnection is one of the terms that is used within the DSM in connection with depersonalization and derealization. So just kind of defining for you and pointing out to you the concept of cognitive disconnection schemata. And then the other, so these are, again, a defectiveness, emotional inhibition that subsume themes of abuse, neglect, and deprivation. That's a definition that is connected to this. And then the other schemata is an overconnection schemata. So that involves impaired autonomy and themes of dependency, vulnerability, and incompetence. So these themes, so schemata are thought processes or belief systems. A schema is a way that you think and feel and believe about yourself and about other things. A schema is just a belief system. Essentially, it's synonymous with paradigm. And so these are a couple of the schemes or schematas that somebody could endorse if they are experiencing depersonalization, derealization disorder. So there is a clear association between this disorder, depersonalization, derealization disorder, and childhood interpersonal traumas in a substantial portion. They probably didn't say significant for a reason. So with depersonalization and derealization, this association exists. However, this association is even higher with dissociative identity disorder. So when you may suspect a client or patient may have this diagnosis, please be sure to look into their trauma history. How at the same time, by virtue of it being a dissociative disorder with, essentially periods of time of not having memory, those childhood traumas may be difficult to recall. All right, so dissociative amnesia, a screening question here is, are there parts of your life you can't remember? So this is dissociative amnesia is characterized by an inability to recall autobiographical information. So the amnesia may be localized. So that means that it's specific to an event or a period of time. It may be selective. So there may be even a more specific aspect of an event that they don't remember. Or it can be generalized, which means that it's just a kind of a global experience of amnesia. So they don't remember their identity. They don't remember really anything about their life history. And the amnesia may also be systematized. So this is where the individual loses memory for a specific category of information. So all memories relating to their family, all memories relating to a particular person, all memories relating to a specific event like childhood sexual abuse, or it can be continuous, which essentially means that the individual is like not able to create new memories. Although some individuals with amnesia promptly notice that they have lost time or that they have a gap in their memory, most individuals with dissociative disorders are initially unaware of their amnesia. So just being aware of that as you are screening for it. So this dissociative amnesia is more likely to occur with a greater number of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, particularly if they are physical or sexual in nature. They are more likely to occur with interpersonal violence. This can be domestic violence, intimate partner violence, stranger violence, but interpersonal just means between two people. And then they can occur with increased severity, frequency, and violence of the trauma. So, at what we would consider kind of more violent, more explosive, more volatile, whatever that is, because that's kind of subjective, that could increase the occurrence or likelihood for dissociative amnesia. And so many individuals with this disorder develop PTSD at some point during their life. So dissociative disorders and stress disorders, there's definitely some correlation or association between these two categories of disorders. Again, this is especially when the traumatic antecedents of their amnesia are brought into conscious awareness. So again, this is something that you'll learn in your trauma course about some of the consequences and some of the things that we have to really be aware of and be sensitive to, and really careful when we are eliciting some of those memories that the individual may have repressed, they may have dissociated from in terms of their trauma. So this can be something where the dissociative amnesia can be very protective of, like, all right, body, I'm the brain, and I'm going to just like cut off the connection of memories to this experience. It's still there, it's latent, but I'm not going to access that. So as a therapist, many times we have the ability to have an individual talk about that to the point where they develop other symptoms such as PTSD, with it being brought into their conscious awareness. So not something to stay away from, just something to be aware of. So then we have dissociative identity disorder, or DID, again, previously known as multiple personality disorder. Again, this is characterized by the presence of two or more distinct personality states, or an experience of possession and recurrent episodes of amnesia. So while somebody may be in one personality state, any like memories that they're kind of creating, or any experiences that they're having, when they move to another personality state, they likely have no awareness or memory of their time in one of the other personality states. So when somebody has DID, they experience recurrent, inexplicable intrusions into their conscious functioning and sense of self. So they'll hear voices, they have dissociated actions and speech, intrusive thoughts, emotions, impulses. This kind of can be heightened by the type of personality state that they are in. They also experience alterations in a sense of being. So again, their attitudes or preferences, this can be things like where they, in one personality state, they love fish, the taste of fish. And in another personality state, that like makes them gag. So even things like that. And feeling like one's bodies or actions are not their own. So you can see some of that like depersonalization. It's happening, odd changes in perception, depersonalization or derealization, such as feeling detached from one's body while cutting. So again, it could be something where they're like watching themselves do it, or as they do it, they're not feeling kind of some of the natural neurological and physiological sensations that would be accompanied with cutting. And then they also experience intermittent functioning of functional neurological symptoms. These could be seen on like an fMRI. And then possession form identities in DID typically manifest as behaviors that appear as if a spirit or a supernatural being or a person outside has taken over. This is one of the areas where we have to be really aware of any sort of like spiritual or religious practices, any sort of cultural norms with this, such as the individual beginning to speak or acting in a distinctly different manner. So again, like these kind of like being taken over by a spirit can be quite normative in certain spiritual or religious circles, in certain cultures. So as the next point says, the majority of possession states around the world are normal, usually part of a spiritual practice, and do not meet criteria for DID. So just being aware of that, this may be something that's not normative to you, that you are unfamiliar with, but that's really where that cultural formulation and having a culturally informed, assessment is really important. And the identities that arise in these possession form DID present recurrently are unwanted and involuntary. So that's a very different thing than having it be part of a, kind of an anticipated part of a spiritual practice. They cause clinically significant distress or impairment, which we know is a very common criterion C, and they are not part of a broadly accepted cultural or religious practice. So again, just being very clear around the possession form identities. So talking about the development and course of DID, so there can generally what happens in terms of the psychological decompensation and overt changes, again, highly correlated with traumatic events. So, but see here how it says psychological decompensation and overt changes in identity may be triggered by the removal from a traumatizing situation. So the interesting thing about trauma is that though it is distressing, literally traumatic, it is in many ways, in many instances, it can be almost kind of stabilizing because it is predictable, it is familiar. So even though the removal from that environment may seem as though this would be categorically only positive, right? But just recognizing that once an individual is removed from that environment, or an individual is removed who was like the perpetrator of the trauma, that can be a trigger for decompensation. So just really being aware of that is important, because I think it almost feels counterintuitive for that to be a reality. So it can be triggered by the individual's children reaching the same age at which the individual was originally abused or traumatized. This is incredibly common with parents, where they have no idea why they are having dreams or having trouble sleeping, or, some kind of physical ailment has come upon them. And many times it's because their children are, at an age where they experience something pretty traumatic, whether it was acute or chronic, doesn't matter. Later trauma, so they can be triggered by later traumatic experience, even seemingly inconsequential ones like a minor motor vehicle accident. So again, if somebody had a, formative, which just like a very big kind of acute, violent, easily identifiable traumatic event, anything subsequently that may seem, kind of minor in comparison can still affect and trigger decomposition and any sort of overt changes. And as I said, kind of in number one, the death of or the onset of a fatal illness in their perpetrators can be traumatizing, or again, trigger some decompensation. So dissociative amnesia is absolutely associated with DID, and here's how. Dissociative amnesia manifests in three ways: as gaps in remote memory of personal life events. So here, some examples are periods of childhood or adolescence, some important life events such as the death of a grandparent, getting married, giving birth. So again, these are big moments that the person does not have any memory of. They can manifest as lapses in dependable memory. So like what happened today, of a skill that they've had for a long time that they, have utilized many times. Like skills on how to do their job, how to use a computer, how to read, drive, these things that we just do all the time. And dissociative can amnesia can manifest as discovery of evidence of their everyday actions and tasks that they do not recollect doing. So maybe, they come about a shopping bag and have these objects and they don't remember buying them. They don't remember obtaining them, finding writings or drawings that they can only really come to the conclusion that they made them, discovering injuries that they don't remember, coming to in the midst of doing something, being pretty disoriented. Where am I? What am I doing? There is, in terms of dissociative identity disorder, there is also a experience called a dissociative fugue. So where this person may travel, and they have no memory of it. So they wake up in a different place. What they believe was they started like their sleep in Los Angeles, and 1 month later, they wake up in New York City and have no recollection of this last month, and they did some traveling in that time. Amnesia in individuals with DID is not limited to stressful or traumatic events. These individuals often cannot recall everyday events as well. So just being clear that though they may be informed by trauma, there's a large association with trauma that the amnesia doesn't necessarily only, because that would be considered, local or selective. But as we know, there's generalized, systematized, and continuous amnesia as well.